Everybody's looking over there. Oh. All right. Ooh. Good morning.
What side do you prefer, Brian?
I'm taking this side.
A
As the older guy, I get a little choice here. So, how's everybody doing today? Quiet? It's like this is kind of a quiet group here. I know on the other side is the cannabis, and I'm like, how the hell are we going to compete
I know.
with that? Now, just so you know, if you were worried about it, they're not giving away free samples, so it's okay. So that's something you don't have to worry about. But want to welcome you all here today. Excited to spend the next 45 minutes with you talking about what I'd like to think is one of our favorite subjects. And that's really the human side of enablement. And so I want to start off with a question. So when's the last time someone came up to you and said, how are you? Now, hopefully that happens every day, right? I mean, especially down here in the South. Now in New York or Seattle where I'm at, yeah, it's kind of like, yo, here's what I need. But now, not just how are you, but when's the last time someone's come up to you and actually dug beneath the surface? To really say, no, how are you? Right? With the goal of one thing of just simply to try and understand. And so this is what we're going to spend some time talking about today, to really that human side of enablement, and we're going to look at it through a behavioral lens. So if we stop and think about it, what do I mean by that, right? Or what the hell does this mean? If we look at the last 20 years in financial services, would you agree that we've probably had this exponential growth in tech, right? I mean, it's literally been a straight up growth, right? However, have we made an impact? I spent the last 20 plus years as a managing principal at various firms, and I can tell you, I mean, people with a lot of money, we've made more money, right, obviously, but the mass affluent market, middle market, are we better at debt? Are we better at savings? Are we better at spending? Are we better at retirement planning? What happened during COVID, right? And so, we love to spend so much money, and we've had this exponential growth in technology over the last 20 plus years, and yes, we've made an impact and difference. I'm not arguing that, but have we made the impact that we could, right? I like to equate it to health. I'm a religious whoop wearer myself and played sports my whole life. If we look at the last 20 years in health, we know now a hell of a lot more than we've ever known about health. I've already had one shoulder replaced at 45, and I got to have another one done here this year. Of course, I didn't know about rotator cuff. I didn't know about core stuff 20 some years ago when I was playing football. And so, yep, lift heavy, lift hard, lift long. Oh, it hurts, push through it, right? Yeah, I wish I would have known the stuff today. Probably wouldn't have to have both of them done. But what I'm getting at is over the last 20 plus years, we've made such an advancement in health. However, what? Obesity's up, mortality's up, diabetes is up. So it's like, what the hell are we doing? What's wrong, right? And so what I want to challenge a little bit on this today and to think about it a little differently, because we focus so heavily on tech, right? And the thing is, at the end of the day, yes, but how I equate that in health is we spend billions of dollars on building a better treadmill, but what are we doing about getting someone from the couch to the treadmill? First step. And the second is understanding, guess what? They're actually going to get off. How do we build resilience to get them back on? How do we do that 2 steps forward, 1 step back? That's still one net step forward. How do we build that resilience in to where at the end, we actually get them on the treadmill and they actually achieve their goals? So that's what we're going to spend some time talking about today. So with that,
yeah, let's play a little bit of a game here. So which line do you think is longer? Maybe just by a show of hands, how many think line B is longer? Okay, no takers? One over there. How many think line A is longer? Okay.
So how many are afraid to answer that question like, hell, I don't want to get it wrong? Right? Okay, yeah. All right, just checking. Okay.
Exactly, yeah. How many pick line C? So A and B, they're both the exact same. Our minds, they deceived us. And we're going to talk about some of the why in just a second. But let's play one more game. How many decisions will you make about food today? We'll do another show of hands. Let's say less than 10? Less than 10 decisions? Okay. 10 to 20 decisions about food today? More than 20? Wow. More than 100? Any takers? More than 100? Okay, we got one in the back.
All right.
Brian.
Guess what? We make roughly 200 decisions a day about food. Now, I mean, myself, I'm probably about 10x that because my partner teases me I'm always hungry. But what do we mean by that? And see, we think about, these are the conscious, when I think vast majority were like 10 to 20, right? I would say, or under, less than 10 to 20. That's what the conscious side of things tell us, right? You know, oh yeah, where do I want to eat? I'm having this for lunch, and that's really at the end of the discussion. But for example, me grabbing this water bottle while I'm talking to you, that's a decision around food, right? All those things throughout the day, we make decision after decision we don't realize. You know, am I going to have this? Am I going to have that? That lower brain is an overdrive for us. Mine, it's extremely an overdrive in there. But the thing behind this is like, all right, so if we think about this way, we think we only make 10, maybe 20 decisions, but in reality, that lower brain's making several hundred throughout a day. So how do we start to get in touch with that? And why does this exist? And that's really what we're going to spend just a few minutes on here, so let's jump in. Cool. That's what behavioral science does, right? You know, we make thousands of decisions a day. Roughly 95% of those are made by the lower brain. There's about 100, 140 behavioral factors that are impacting those decisions, right? We don't realize that. We don't think about that. Do I pick this up? Do I pick that up? We don't even think about it. When I go to click on the mouse, when I'm doing this, all that stuff is the lower brain just in overdrive in how we do things. And so the thing is for us, you know, if we think about it, we focus on what we think we understand, right? So for financial services, we got clients that are not saving enough, or maybe they're not buying this product, maybe it's insurance or that to protect their family. So we're like, all right, well, they probably don't have a plan. They don't know what's going on. What's the problem here? Let's apply what we call logical planning, right? We're going to educate them. We're going to talk to them about it. They're going to give the head nod and say, sure, I get this. I'm going to do it, right? And that's the reality. That's what happens. So how do we actually connect to that lower brain, not from a good or bad, right or wrong, but really just understand, here's how I think behaviorally when I make my decisions. So let's jump in a little bit.
Yeah, so here's an example of one of the most powerful concepts in behavioral science, popularized by Daniel Kahneman, who, as a psychologist, won the Nobel Prize in economics. I'm sure many are familiar with his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. We love this depiction of a rider and an elephant in place of System 1 and System 2 thinking that Kahneman talks about. So System 1 is your automatic, your intuitive response, whereas System 2 is your reflective, your thoughtful, analytical response. So think of, in your mind, there's actually a rider sitting on top of an elephant. The rider, that's you, the logical, the rational, the reasonable one. The problem is you're sitting on top of a 12,000-pound animal, and that elephant is stubborn, and it is emotional, and it is reactive. And oftentimes we think, as the rider, I'm in control. When I want to make a decision, I want to eat healthy and I want to go to the gym, I'm going to do it. But really what happens is the elephant's in control, and as the rider, we're sort of at the mercy of the elephant's decision making, and without working together between the rider and the elephant, it's very, very difficult to sustain the behaviors that we know we want to do.
I mean, and that's when you think about it, like, all right, how many of us like to eat healthy, right? You know, we try, right? So 11 o'clock, all right, I'm going to have the salad. 1 o'clock comes around, what do you have? The pizza, right? And so we think, all right, well, so what happens is we tend to chalk that up to, well, you know what, I don't have clear enough goals, don't have grit, I don't have self-discipline, right? We like to blame things because we like to say this is the problem. No, in the reality, what it is I'm the little guy on top of the elephant, and the elephant's saying, the hell with that, we're having the pizza, right? And so how do you compete with that? If you're not consciously aware of that and understand, like, all right, the elephant's going to want the pizza, so what can I do if I'm aware of it to make those changes? And that's really where we want to spend some time today. So,
and that's exactly what behavioral science is. I know it's a term that has become popularized and gets thrown around a lot, but at the end of the day, it just helps us to understand our own behavioral drivers, motivators, and what are the psychological barriers that maybe don't allow us to do the things that we want to do. Bringing this into the context of the business world. So because people aren't aware of their own drivers and their own motivators, and we think really Ogilvy, the advertising legend, said it best here with consumers don't think how they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. So what does that mean for us? It means that when we're simply asking consumers what they want, how they feel, what they think, what they plan to do, which is what we do in traditional market research and consumer surveys, in polling, we're really just getting the response of the rider. We're not able to tap into the elephant, to tap into the unconscious. So the rider, we know, can't really articulate what it is exactly that the elephant wants. And what we want to talk about here today is, how do you tap into that? I think this is
the next slide. All right. So again, like we use that elephant and rider. Another thing is the iceberg, right? That conscious, the 5% that we understand, the 95% that we don't. And I think the thing is again, with behavioral, it's really simple. It's not about trying to diagnose. This is not therapy, okay? So don't worry when I ask how you're doing today. That was not the whole goal behind this, okay? We're not going to get deep on that, but really just understand that there's a lot of other factors at play, because we tend to focus, especially in financial services. They're not buying this product. Our sales are down, right? Disability insurance has gone from roughly 23% to 13% ownership. What's the problem? We need to do a better job at the product, better job. Annuity sales, right? You know, we spend millions on trying to redesign the product to connect with the client. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. But yet we don't realize, like, well, does the client actually get it? Where's the client at? What are they thinking? And this other thing that I want to get out of the mind a little bit is, you know, we love to fix, right? And especially in financial services, spent 20 plus years in it. We always want to make people better. We want to fix things. And we try to figure out, aha, here's your problem. We love to diagnose, and then we love to go right to here's what you need to do. And what do clients do? Sure, I'll do it. But in reality, what happens, right? Like, how many of us have really made that big impact? Obviously, if someone's doing something wrong that's harming themselves, we really want to step in. Otherwise, we're messy individuals. Again, we're the small little rider on top of this big ass, excuse my language, big ass elephant, right? It's like we don't have a lot of that control. So let's figure out, how do we work with that? What can we do? How can we actually better understand it to help to guide and control where we're going from there? So but we want to give you a couple, just to kind of talk a little bit about what are some of those behavioral factors. So regulatory focus is a very common one. So we have what's called promotion and prevention. Now, how many of you remember back when COVID first came out, all these big ads that came out in these unprecedented times, right? So how many of you after about day 3 was like, God, could we talk about something else? Show of hands. Okay, for me it was like hands, foot, and everything, right? Okay, how many of you are like, wow, this is really getting to me? Anybody? Anybody? Yeah, okay, who wants to admit it, right? Okay, great. So what I'm sharing here is that this is what prevention versus promotion is. Some of us are goal-driven. Some of us are negative experience-driven. We want to avoid this. Promotion is like, let's talk about what's good, talk about the positive. Negative side on the prevention is, what can go wrong? What am I trying to avoid? So understanding these behavioral traits and how they impact, well, what do we do right now? One message fits everybody, but does it? So if we just simply know this simple thing, regulatory focus of an individual, we can communicate with them in the way that they receive information to better connect. So another one that we want to talk about is maximizer and satisfizer, right? Analytic driver. So my co-founder is a brilliant quant that can literally spend 12 hours on Excel sheets and smile the whole 13 hours, right, or 12 hours. Myself, after about 30 seconds, I tense up. I'm a driver, right? Show me big picture, draw it out, and then I'm ready to go. So, but how do we communicate with each? If we think about it, traditional marketing, if we look at any site, whether that's an app or a website, what do? It's one size fits all. So are we communicating one over the other? Are we missing on both? Again, simply understanding how we process information.
Yeah, when I talk about maximizers, I love my mother-in-law, but the example I typically use is she loves her Ben & Jerry's pint of ice cream, and she will literally drive to 3 different grocery stores in town to get the best price. She's going to exhaust every option. For me, I'm more of a satisficer. We were house hunting a couple of years ago. I had my requirements, 4 bedrooms, wanted a decent yard, not too crazy of a commute to the city. We found that on the 8th house. I didn't feel like I needed to go look at the other 100 houses on the market. The problem is, we don't know this information, right? Who's a maximizer, satisficer? We don't know it about ourselves. We don't know about our spouses, about our colleagues, and we definitely, as firms, we don't know it about our clients. And for a client, for them to know, for them to know what their decision style is extremely helpful because, hey, if you know you're a maximizer, you know that you might overanalyze, get caught in choice paralysis because you're looking at just too much information. As an advisor or a firm, you want to know who's a maximizer, who's a satisficer, so you can engage with them in the way that they want to be engaged with. How can we do that, right? That's what Brian and I are going to talk about here. And really, I think we're halfway through perfect. So we've got some case studies we just want to talk you through. How do you actually apply behavioral insights? And the key takeaway from this slide here is, if you look at traditional surveys all the way on the left, right, they're not incorporating anything from the elephant. It's just the stated responses from the rider. That's the way the industry has historically done things. Now, you don't have to jump all the way to the right, to the real world behavioral experiments, kind of what Brian and the Syntonic team do for a living. There are ways to incorporate this, and we're going to talk about a couple of case studies, right? A behavioral survey, which is just tweaking a traditional survey, and then hypothetical experiments. So we'll start off with this year at EY, our team partnered with Brian, so this was very exciting for us. Now, EY runs a global wealth management research report every other year, and it's a globally representative sample of 2,600 wealth management clients. It's a huge, huge commercial effort, and it's one of the top productions in the industry. What we wanted to do differently this year was to just behavioralize this existing traditional survey.
So real quick on that, Samir, you know, one thing to remember is like the survey that's been done with the Global Wealth Management Report, that's been the standard, right? We go out, we do a survey, right? We get information back and we better understand the market. You know, kind of like to think of it, that's our baseline. It gives us great information. It's a hell of a lot better than not having something, right? But if we think about that as like today, you know, going through these examples, if that's kind of the baseline of what we're used to doing in the industry itself, right? Just going out, understanding, asking some basic, you know, how do you feel about basic psychological questions, which are an essential part of any understanding. However, it's one piece. So.
Exactly. And all we did, right, is we asked a couple of questions to derive whether participants in the survey were maximizers or satisficers, and that way we could report out by this trait. And just by adding a couple of questions, we were able to find very, very powerful results. You can see maximizers are 3 times as likely to prefer monthly advice than satisficers. Maximizers are also twice as likely to switch wealth management providers, to go to a new advisor than satisficers generally, and then 4 times as likely to seek a new provider when faced with overload. From a behavioral science, a psychology perspective, is this surprising? No, not at all. You would expect maximizers who are always seeking the best option. You'd expect maximizers that like detailed information. It makes sense that they want more advice. The powerful insight is here, wouldn't you want to know as an advisor or as a firm who is a maximizer so that you know who's more likely to leave and you know how to best engage with them so they stay with you. You don't want to use the one-size-fits-all approach because it's going to work for half your clients and not for the other half. So that was an example of sort of the entry level to incorporating some behavioral. What's the next level? So hypothetical experiments. Our team at EY, we ran a behavioral experiment recently, just wrapped it up last month. And this is taking things a little further. So it's actually designing the survey in a randomized controlled setting, but building it behaviorally from the ground up. So you start with looking at literature, right? I think in this industry we have a tendency to start with, well, what are competitors doing, right? And maybe what are some beacons outside of our industry doing? And let's try to mimic. We get very specific about what's the behavior we're trying to influence, in this case, annuity purchase intention. And then we look at academic literature to understand what is known, what are some of the psychological barriers that might cause people not to engage in our desired behavior or to purchase annuities in this case. So think of an academic study, right? It's a lab experiment, if you will. And what we wanted to go and seek answers to is the annuity puzzle. I'm sure most are familiar with in this room, which is why don't people who can rationally should value annuities very much, right? It's a hedge against longevity risk. You don't have to worry about principal loss. There's the smoothing of income, right? We know how much people value Social Security income and pension income. Why aren't we seeing similar adoption of annuity products? We wanted to use this behavioral angle because we figured there's something under the surface, right? There's something the elephant can tell us. So through the literature review, it's about 50 or maybe 70 scientific articles, we learned that there were three key themes or barriers. One is just product complexity. The features of annuity products can be overwhelming and just very hard to understand. The stat that stood out to me, and I don't think it's on this slide actually, is only 25% of consumers can accurately describe 7 out of 10 characteristics of an annuity product. So people really just don't understand them. The second barrier is negative perception. I think we all maybe had an intuitive sense of that annuities just get a bad rap, which is even more surprising because we know that they don't really understand the product to begin with. And then third, longevity pessimism, maybe a little bit more straightforward, more of a psychological bias, in that we just tend to underestimate how long we're going to live, and therefore we may undervalue the benefits of an annuity product. Based on that literature and a few other steps I'm going to skip for time here, we developed a randomized control experiment with 3 different interventions. So the experiment had 4 groups. One group is the control group, and this group just saw industry standard language on describing an annuity product. So the same thing you'd see on kind of a carrier digital website. The 3 interventions are designed, again, going back to the literature to understand how do we overcome the barriers of complexity, of perception and longevity pessimism. The first intervention, I know it's going to be hard to read here, is simplifying the choice. What does that mean? We did not want to mention product names, allocations, and instead, participants in this group, they got to a little hypothetical question. Their 62-year-old uncle is about to retire and asking for advice, and they saw this table with 3 options. We only highlighted, again, the most simple and important information that a person, right, a human would want to know, which is, all right, what are your monthly expenses? And in option 1, it was monthly paycheck, trying to make it relatable to other income they might receive. And then we talked about longevity, which we framed as the probability of running out of money. Options 1 and 2 here both had annuities, and option 3 did not, but they didn't know that as they're answering this question. And it didn't matter how they answered the questions. What we're doing is we're measuring later in the experiment the annuity purchase intentions. So the question is, how likely would you be to purchase an annuity within your own retirement portfolio on a 4-point scale? We would then compare the purchase intention across the control group versus these 3 interventions. The second intervention here is normative priming. The idea here from behavioral science is how can you sort of normalize, especially if people have a negative perception, how can you normalize that this is a protection product? So it's a very, very basic just set of 4 questions. Imagine you just bought a new car. Which protection product would you buy? Right? Car insurance or health insurance, home insurance. Then you ask them, imagine you just bought a new home. Right? They're going to buy home insurance. Imagine you just had a new child, buy health insurance. And then the 4th question was more of a hypothetical. Now imagine you're 62 years old. Would you be interested in a product that can help guarantee your paycheck in retirement? Yes or no? Doesn't matter how they respond there. They're going to be asked the same intention question later. And then finally, the third technique from behavioral science is called revealed preferences. So you just ask a very simple 2 questions. 1, on a scale of 1 to 10, how interested would you be in a product that can guarantee a paycheck in retirement? So you can imagine most people, that's a pretty high number. Second question, how much have you invested, time, money, et cetera, on said product? Right? That number is going to be lower. We're trying to activate their reflective system. Now on to the results. So the control group, we measured this by participants that selected they would likely purchase an annuity or definitely purchase an annuity. Control group, you had 43% of that group saying they intend to purchase. All 3 intervention groups saw a very high uplift, both practically at 61% uplift for the first 2 and a 43% for the third intervention. And then from a statistical perspective, sorry, we nerd out a little bit in this field. Treatments 1 and 2 were both statistically significant at a p-value of 0.04. And takeaway here, really, Brian, I know you love to talk about this, is the products are fine.
And that's just it. You know, again, like I said earlier, we spend so much time on trying to reinvent or redefine the product. But the question is how much time do we spend on the human, right? To help them understand, not help them understand here's what they're buying, but help them understand themselves, right? And this is what I want to talk about next, because all this is great, right? Behavioral science has been around for a long time. For some reason, we hear behavioral science and we think, oh my God, that's that thing that's up there. I have 15 PhDs on the team. I joke that I'm the dumbest guy on the team, and I'm perfectly happy with that. When I need an answer, I go to one of them. But the thing is it's been up here in this theory for years, but we've been using it every day. Coca-Cola, all the different, Philip Morris, we've been using behavioral science for years to be able to drive engagement, right? And so the key, though, is how do we use it to help empower the individual? You know, in financial services, we like to say that, all right, I'll be the quarterback and we'll handle all the things, right? Whether that's a WellTech, Robo, or advisor-led, the thing is times are changing. We haven't made the impact. When do you see your advisor? How often do you log into your bank account? How often do you check your investment statement? No. Very rarely. Those that do, maybe the maximizer might, or those that are really hyper, into it, focused. But a vast majority of us, we go out and we enjoy life. And so how do we now meet them where they are? So how do we bring the human back to the center? And that's really with behavioral science how we're able to do this. Because up until now, this is all right. We ask some questions. Now we have some information. It's firm-driven, right? We're really good to drive confidence and trust from a firm level. Right? Here's why you should work with us. Here's why you should trust us. We're AAA rated, whatever that may be. However, what are we doing from the client's perspective? And so by creating that understanding, again, understanding how I think behaviorally when I make my financial decisions, not from a good, bad, right, or wrong, but here's the elephant. I think here's how I work. I'm the writer. Here's the elephant that I'm writing. Let me understand this elephant. And so that's really where we start. So how do we do that? Well, there's 2 things that we got to look at. First is we've got to deal with ideal self and real self. Anybody familiar with those? So the ideal self is the person when we go out on the first date, right? We always put the best foot forward. We look good. By the 3rd date, we're like, who the hell is this person I meet, right? And so that's ideal self. Guys, we suffer from it, right? When we sit down in front of an advisor, yeah, sure, I've got plenty of money to invest, and then all of a sudden something happens, oh, I got to go ask my spouse or partner, right? It's always about wanting to put the best foot forward, whether that's an interview or whatever that is. However, how do we get at the ideal self, right? And that ideal self is the real person. That's the person that is making those decisions there, not what we want others to see, right? I joke and I call it the Instagram life, right? If I see a bunch of happy pictures of couples posting every selfie on there on Instagram, they're probably fighting. And that's not to be mean. I know there are some that do that, where I see the people posting all these great trips, they're probably living in a studio apartment with a massive credit card bill. We create this image, and unfortunately that's been driven by technology to where we want to create that image of here's who we are. So again, how do we peel that back in a way that doesn't say good, bad, right, or wrong, but really I just want to get at the core to understand myself. So that's the first, is getting to real as opposed to ideal. The second is psychological questions, right? The top of the iceberg. Those are needed. The feeling, how do you feel? How do you think? What do you believe? Those are important parts. But then how do we get underneath? So for example, hiring for diversity. I'm sure all of you have had some survey, something like that you had to take. Do I hire for diversity? Who's going to say no, right? We know what they're asking. We have this. So again, the ideal self comes out. Now, if I wanted to frame this from a behavioral approach, and my PhD team gives me shit about this, so please, it's not scientifically valid. I'm using this for demonstration purposes only. I just have to put that disclaimer there. But if I say, all right, you're going to the store, you're going to make stir fry tonight. You're in the produce section. You've got yellow, orange, and green peppers. Do you pick all of one color or do you pick one of each? Now, what happens here? Let's say you didn't know that I was asking to figure out, do you hire for diversity? You're like, what the hell? And you just go with what you do, right? So the goal is, that's the elephant. We're trying to get the elephant to answer, right? That's the 200 decisions we make about food. By the way, that's one of the decisions we make. And we probably made 3 different decisions just figuring out which pepper and then how many different ones that we want. But that's what we're trying to get at. So really trying to understand how we approach things in this experience-based engagement. So we call it psychometric experience-based engagement. So we're able to ask questions in a way to get at the real self and that lower brain to tap into and understand how an individual thinks behaviorally. So now, why do we do that, right? If it's just, I ask some questions to get it, so now I have this information, great. Then that's still from the firm side. It's not human-centered. And what can I do with that? There's a lot. Obviously, as Prasad, boy, I was going to call you my co-founder here on this. No, as Samir, had mentioned. And so, but now, if we want to take that to the next level, and here's the thing, right? Not every solution has to be this. If I'm selling a water bottle, basic marketing is fine. If there's certain products where it's a one and done and that's it, a lot of these early treatments work really well. But if we're looking to truly improve client outcomes, it is a long-term solution-based relationship, right? Where we're really trying to shorten the trust cycle, build better outcomes for the client, which if we focus on that, and I usually say the hell with the firms for a second, if we focus on that, guess what? The firms are going to do well. But if we start there, right, it really starts with how do we build trust and confidence in the client themselves. So it's creating the right level of understanding. So it's not about what I know about you. It's what you know about you and that elephant, right? You guys are going to be so sick of this elephant by the end of the day, right? But this elephant is important, right? And the better that I understand that, the better that I'm able to make those decisions and how they go there. So that's really either through natural processing language, gamification, or through assessment-based. We need direct human engagement. So we have to ask those questions. We have to create that understanding. And then the most important part is we've got to provide the understanding. Because if I just ask the questions and now that I have the information I engage, clients, and think about it, most of the forms that clients fill out, they don't even understand why they're filling them out, right? And so we call that asymmetric engagement. We really want to bring symmetry to that. So if now I'm able to create the right level of understanding, share, here's why you do what you do. Here are the traits that impact this decision, that decision. What's great about it, not what sucks or what's wrong. What's great about it and things to think about, right? For example, overconfidence. If I don't have, significant level of overconfidence, probably wouldn't have been an advisor, probably wouldn't, been part of a startup. So that's an important thing, but can that come back to bite me? Yes, it can. If I'm not aware of it, I may say, all right, let's just go with it, right? So little things in there, and again, just understanding, not from a good, bad, right, or wrong, and I know I beat that to death, but again, we like to fix, we like to prescribe. Avoid that. It's just about understanding. If we understand those things, now we're able to move things forward. So it's creating that right level of understanding with the next best behavioral action. We're all familiar with next best action, but what is that next best behavioral action? So yes, now I know this about myself, aha, then what's the next step that I do? We break it down really simply into understand, learn, or act. There's really 3 steps that you can take, right? Understand is not what can I as a firm understand about you, but understand is what can I help the client understand about themselves. Learn is putting the right learning content. We love to shove pages and pages of learning content, right? Because if we think more is better, and yes, there is a lot of studies, and yes, it does help, but at the end of the day, there's an overload, right? When I have 10 pages of education information, well, obviously it's not working. So how do I put that right content, and it's not just the right content, in the way that they understand it, right? So if I'm regulatory focus driven, promotion, how do I present it this way? Maximizer, satisfizer. If I'm a maximizer, need a little more details. If I'm a satisfizer. And again, if the client understands this about themselves and the content aligns with it, and it's done in a transparent measure, we have a greater uplift in engagement, right? And then obviously ACT, we know what the ACT component is of that. So that's really the key of how we do this. So for example, now let's take that same annuity slide that Samir was talking about just a moment ago. So in this case, we're working, this was a Fortune 100 company, she'll remain nameless, but working with driving engagement. Their goal was twofold. Number one was a significant amount of unengaged clients that they wanted to re-engage, and number two, they wanted to drive greater sales to their annuity. So great problem. So how do we approach this? Real simple. No different than anything else. Starting the discovery is really not to introduce something new or foreign to the client, but how do we look at what a standard client journey is given any experience, and where are the friction points along the way where if the client understands X about themselves behaviorally, and then with the right next best behavioral action, we're able to move through those points better, right? And so that's really where we started. And understanding that, so it was a simple investor personality, understand how you think financially. And in that, we were able to, drive that to, the goal was to drive them to digital advice, right? So we put this on 3 pages. I think it was the annuity page, the retirement page, and one other. So we had an 84% completion rate, which is pretty good cold. We had a 64 call to action, right? 64%, really good. So during the initial POC. So now somebody got the bright idea of let's put it on the logout screen. What do you think? Good, bad? How many of you guys, when you go to logout screen, actually spend any time on it? How many of you guys actually use a logout screen instead of just going right for the X at the top, right? Okay. So the funny part was we stayed at 84% completion rate. And over 80% of our participants came from that. So what does that tell us? Very simple. It's like, not to go all Maslow-y and say, all right, men search for meaning, but we're starving to understand ourselves better. If you think about it over the last 5 years, 10 years, things like Whoop, things like Headspace, things like Calm, there's this mindfulness, there's this meditation, there's a shift to try and understand ourselves better. However, as that's happening, guess what? We're getting inundated. I even had to leave my cell phone over there because I know I would get bugged probably 30 times. We're getting inundated with more and more information, less. So we have these relationships that are a mile long and an inch deep. How do we change that, right? How do we just take a brief second? We're not trying to say you're going to sit down and go through therapy and spend an hour, but this isn't a matter of minutes, right? What we timed this out should be around a 2.5, 3 minute quiz to go through. The average time that was spent on it was around 6.5 minutes. So what did that tell us? That told us that people were generally interested in this, right? Samir likes to use that Cosmo quiz thing. It's like, this is the Cosmo quiz on steroid, right? But we enjoy that stuff. I'm one of those geeky guys, anytime I'm on Facebook and there's a, what kind of Jedi are you? I'll take it. If I'm posting something kind of fun on there around finances, I get 1 like, maybe 2 likes. If I post that, I'll get 40 people that take the thing and follow up. So what does that tell us? We're looking for those things, right? We're looking to connect, understand, and things like that. So how do we drive that? Our call to action dropped to a 32%, but that was still really good. The end result was we had almost a 3x improvement of digital advice completion. So what does that tell us? So now if we take what Samir showed just a little bit earlier, right? And we show, here's what we're able to do if we go from the firm side. Now if we're able to focus and be human mindset driven, right, or client mindset driven, and really focus from the client side, create that right level of understanding for them, and it's make them the quarterback, right? I'm sorry, I hate using sports analogies, but I don't know what else is another way, the captain, or however we want to say it, but make them in charge of their decision making. Give them the right understanding. This is not to give them, here's everything about you, but create that right level of understanding with that next best behavioral action, and essentially create this roadmap. Here's how the elephant works. Here's how to navigate with the elephant. That's where we're able, if you combine this with the earlier stats that Samir was showing, we're able to drive an even greater uptake. So I think, where are we at on time? Yep, you know what? Let's turn it over for questions because I can go on about 2 hours on this. And this is the fun stuff for me is geeking out on this, but really like to open it up for any questions. We have some questions.
We've got a couple. Okay. You might have just addressed, but the question is how do you incorporate these ideas into product design and development?
Great question. I mean, again, it's really understanding a couple things, right? I think the first is what's the product and what's the goal of the firm itself, right? Is human at the center really the best thing? If I'm selling this water bottle, do I need to have the human at the center? No. A lot of us will say that's great, but at the end of the day, that's not important. If the solution that I'm providing is a product that, I don't want to say one and done, But you understand it's more transaction-based. It may not be needed. And the problem is if you focus too much time on that, it actually can have a negative side. Now, if you do understand that now that this is the goal and the solution is something that is, and again, our singular focus is improving client outcomes. As a firm, that's all we have. That's it. We say that everything else, the advisors, wealth-techs, robos, they're a byproduct. But really focused on improving client outcomes, because if we can do that, everything else follows through. So if that is the goal, then the second part is, because some of you may not be in the decision-maker spot at the end of the day, and I've seen this and we've worked with this, and I know Samir can talk at length about this, but if this isn't a firm-level buy-in, it gets really painful. There's been a lot of behavioral units that have been started at a lot of banks and firms that millions of dollars have been thrown, and unfortunately, guess what? They shut down. Because there's not buy-in, and that's okay, right? So it's really looking at what's the impact. Is the goal really to put the human at the center? Or is the goal to how can we use behavioral science to improve engagement, right? Two different things, right? One is, the old, is it 80% fat or 80% fat free or 20% fat? Simple thing, right? Of course you want to say, if you say 20% fat, it sounds really bad unless you're barbecuing. If you say 80% fat free, it sounds better. Same thing. Obviously there's behavioral interventions that can be done like that from the firm side. But again, from the client side, if you're looking to really bridge that gap and bring the human to the center, that's really the first step, is making sure there's alignment.
Yeah, I think that nails it in terms of the product approach. And I'd just add, if you don't have the capability in-house today, right? There's a whole ecosystem of folks like Brian's team, like my team, that are spending their days and years focusing right here. So it's very easy to collaborate and find ways to just test, right? And it's behavioral science. The whole idea here is you don't have to do the whole kit and caboodle all at once. You can just do quick tests to see what might work in your specific context in your organizations. Do we have time for?
We have some more Q&A. If there are other questions.
Let's see one more question here, which I can probably start us off here. So the question is, how do you think about behavioral science being used to cross the line from enablement to manipulation? And with great power comes great responsibility. So this is a huge, huge topic, the ethics of behavioral science, and dark patterns, and gray areas, right? It's because we can find ways to influence context, to influence elephants. There's a great study about music in wine shops. So if you're in a wine shop and there is French music playing, people are more likely to buy French music. And if there's German music playing, you're more likely to buy German wine. And they'd asked the consumers afterwards, did the music have any influence on your purchase decision? They said, what music? Right, so there are ways to influence. Most behavioral scientists are part of an applied organization where ethics is a big component of the training. But at the end of the day, there is no real kind of regulatory.
There isn't yet. I mean, there's a focus to try and do that, right? My chief science officer runs the behavioral economics guide. They do a behavioral ethics course, and there's a big push. But I think the way to answer that question, because it's been used for years no matter what, right? It's being used today. We look at everything in social media, everything, it exists today. It's psychology and behavior, that's been around forever. I mean, Philip Morris, I remember growing up in the 80s, it was cool. I remember taking pictures next to a Philip Morris cigarette thing, right? Remember the candy cigarettes. So obviously there's a lot of that behind there. But if we focus on putting the human in the center, the individual, and it's about creating education and understanding for them, that's how we're able to fight back against that, if you will, right? So yes, it can be used for bad, it can be used for good. You know what, we have insurance and investment products that do bad and do good as well. So everything has both of those. But I think if we stay focused on client mindset driven, everything is about client empowerment, client understanding, we can avoid that, right? And at least minimize that, So other questions? Other than, is this my 30th decision? What am I eating for lunch? Are we out? Does that count towards one of those decisions, right? But with that, thank you all very much, and enjoy the conference. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Doing great.